and welcome to this talk about the basic structure of a society, a recognition theoretical account. I'm Onni Hirvonen, as you might expect, and first of all I have to apologize that this will not be a full recognition theoretical account of a basic structure of a society. What I'll provide here in the next 20 minutes or so is rather an outline of some ideas about the so-called basic structure of society that I find interesting. And these ideas are presented mostly from the recognition theoretical perspective. Anyway, without any further ado and further excuses, let's get into it. So why would one be interested in the basic institutions of any given society? Well, my motivation draws from the everyday political talk, and one could say that at least in the Finnish context you can hear it from the either side of the political spectrum, from the left and right, so to speak. You could have, for example, conservative politicians saying that basic institutions or structures like marriage are eroding because of the new legislation and so forth, or people from the progressive side saying that the basic institutions and structures of, let's say, a welfare state are outdated, or they do not serve their functions anymore because of the situation has changed from those days when those institutions were set up. And of course, any given society can be thought of as being constituted of social institutions or institutionalized social practices, but not all of these are equally relevant for the existence of society, for example. And it is quite common to talk of a basic structure or basic structures of society and set those apart from different kinds of structures of society. But then the question is that what are these basic structures or the basic functions of basic institutions that we should hold on to? Or put it more clearly, what makes an institution or structure basic? Is it something like continuous reproduction and functionality of the society itself? And if it is, or is there any sort of particular functions that make institution basic? And if there are, so would those functions be essential or historically contingent instead? One obvious way of making sense of what is a basic structure of any given society is to provide, of course, clear definitions of both of those terms. Here I will focus first on the basic, or the term basic, and I'll return to structures or institutions later on. Just as a sort of side note on the terms, in this talk I will use the terms institutions and structures interchangeably, so hopefully you will not be confused by that. Anyway, one of the sort of simplest ways of thinking of what is a basic structure is to say that the basic structure is the ground level of social reality. So, for example, and this is from Brian Epstein's encyclopedia article, social theorists have treated a variety of different categories of social entities as basic, including social laws, social facts, social groups, humankind's institutional facts, social objects and social properties, social predicates, social practices, and social processes. So in short, these all views, they of course disagree on what is the basic level of society, but what they are after is that the social reality is somehow grounded on these sort of basic elements, which are the sort of basic things that work as building blocks for the social reality. And another more normative perspective suggests that the basic structure is actually relevant for justice as well. So, for example, in Rawlsian social theory, the basic structure of society is the first subject of justice. So a society is a more or less independent, closed and self-sufficient system of cooperation within which it is possible for a person to live out a complete life. This is not completely at odds with the idea that something grounds social reality. I think it just adds to the picture by saying that this is also normatively relevant, or the basic structure is somehow normatively relevant. But I'll not stay with these accounts any further, but what I want to do from now on is to provide a suggestion that the Hegelian recognition theory manages in its own way to provide a view that has both of these suggested sides, the grounding level side and the normative side in it. So let's get on to recognition then. But what is exactly recognition? For those who know the recognition theories, this might seem really basic, pun may be a little bit intended there, but recognition in its Hegelian sense is basically just mutual affirmative interpersonal relations. And what I outline over here is something that I take to be very sort of central ideas of contemporary recognition theories, even though the recognition theorists themselves might have slightly different formulations of these points. But I think these are included in almost all of the contemporary recognition theories. So firstly, there is the constitution claim of recognition. So recognition is constitutive of us. So we are built through recognition from others and of others, and we want recognition. And as Charles Taylor famously put it, recognition is a vital human need. Second, kind of related to this, is that recognition actually comes in different forms. And most famously, as put by Axel Honneth in his struggle for recognition, there's the love recognition, respect recognition, and esteem recognition. And these different forms of recognition are then distinguished by their separate effects on our relations to self. So different kinds of recognition build different kinds of self-relations. And most importantly for this talk, each of these forms of recognition is also represented in the institutions of society. And this relates to the mediation claim, so recognition is always institutionally mediated. With the separation of different forms of recognition, and with the idea that these different forms of recognition are realized through different institutions, we get to an idea of sort of basic institutions of recognition, which can reflect the Hegelian trio of modern institutions: family, markets, and civil society, to be precise. And here I'd like to quote Honneth in length. So, the historical shape that these media take on in a specific social formation are what I term recognition orders. And here it's good to note that Honneth is not really talking about the Hegelian institutions, but rather about the mediated recognition in general. It is only in light of these institutions that persons grant each other a normative status. These recognition orders consist of institutionalized normative structures that have grown up around the main tasks of social reproduction, while making the latter dependent upon the mutual fulfillment of obligations and roles. And one way to put this is to say that our social world has been divided in institutional spheres that include, firstly, institutions of care, secondly, institutions of merit, achievements and work, and thirdly, legal and governmental institutions. And now with this division, we are back at the Hegelian institutions. In this picture, family is based on love and care as forms of recognition, and it enables self-trust and an understanding of one's own needs. Markets, on the other hand, are based on esteem for achievements and capabilities, and then they enable self-esteem as valuable contributor in society as the form of the self-understanding that grows from the esteem gotten in the markets, in the market sphere. And civil society, finally, is based on equal and mutual respect between citizens, and it provides self-respect as a member of the normative realm, or as a co-constitutor of the normative realm. But why should we think, what would it be that makes these institutions then basic institutions? One way of putting that is to say that they enable modern self-understanding of a person's, of the self-understanding as meaningful, respected, and valuable as a person. They constitute those forms of self-understanding, so they constitute the modern personhood, and it is the modern personhood that kind of makes up the social world as well. So without these kind of modern persons, we wouldn't have any other forms of social world. So they sort of keep up the modern individuals as they are. So now we have a view of certain institutions which enable the modern human life form. So, but it seems that something is missing from this picture. Certainly it is so that there are other institutions that are more basic, which are required for the recognition orders to exist. For example, language. All of those recognition orders use language. Maybe cultural habits would be something that is broader, which is shared between different recognition institutions. Where does money fit in this kind of picture is basic for a modern society. Or stuff like infrastructure, is that a sort of basic structure of society? Certainly we need houses and roads and something like that for the life to be possible. And in here I think that the late great Raimo Tuomela's fourfold differentiation between different kinds of institutions might be helpful. So as Raimo says, so there's four different kinds of or four different levels of institutions. So firstly, institution could be considered as a sort of norm-governed social practice. So this is the sort of basic form of institutions. Secondly, institution could be something that confers a new conceptual and social status to some sort of entity, to a person, to an object or activity. Thirdly, institution could confer not only a new conceptual and social, but also a new deontic status and status functions to go with it to the members of the collective in question that this institution applies to. And fourthly, we could see institutions as organizations involving specific social positions and task rights systems, to use Tuoma's terms. So where do these recognition frameworks or recognition institutions fall within these categorizations? It seems to me that the institutions of recognition are particular types of normative settings or frameworks which go to the categories B and C in the Tuoma's categorization. So they kind of evaluate institutions, not necessarily evaluate, that might not be the right word over here, but they sort of look at the institutions from the perspective of the positive self relations that those institutions enable. So they are not necessarily basic in the sense that they are not only of sort of most basic form of institutions that they exist. So they are a little bit more developed institutions, but still one could say that there's this sort of constitutive claim to those institutions that without these kind of institutions we wouldn't have individuals who would be following these non-governed social practices of the type A. I would like to finish this talk with getting back to the original motivation of the whole presentation, which was politics. So even if one isn't fully convinced that the recognition theoretical view of institutions really presents a basic level of social reality, I still think that the recognition theoretical view might be helpful for the political side of the analysis of basic institutions of any given society. And why is it so? Partly because recognition view is inherently normative. So if we get back to the original problem with our assumed political agents, that what would it mean to take care of the basic institutions of society? Or how do we preserve the basic institutions of society or develop the basic institutions of society? For example, should we fix the key institutions of a welfare state, as the debate in Finland is right now going on, or perhaps shift their functions altogether? Or maybe, as another example, is there something wrong in the democratic institutions of Western states right now? All of these debates are really the key political debates of our times. But without any kind of normative guidelines, it's really difficult to see how should we really solve these questions in practice. So we might end up in endless disagreements about what is even the function of the given institution. Or even if we agree about the functions, we might disagree about the means of fulfilling those functions. Now, the recognition theoretical view is normative in that it underlines what is necessary for the current forms of self-understanding of the modern individuals. So it points out the social wrongs or the social pathologies around which much of the current literature revolves around, and kind of shows how institutions might fail to live up to the normative expectations that modern individuals have of them. So in a sense, the recognition theory provides kind of a normative grammar for evaluating how the institutions works, to quote Axel Honneth. Anyway, so it's kind of if the philosophical anthropology provided by recognition theories is correct, enabling recognition and avoiding mis- and non-recognition would be the key criteria for evaluating the functioning of any given institution and the functioning of institutional practices. But does this make the recognition theory then really sort of conservative in a way that it just wants to sort of conserve those old functions of old institutions? And I would like to end this talk with a note that the recognition theoretical view is not necessarily a static view. As John Dewey puts it, all the institutions are products of historical development. They are sort of products of their time, and when we got sort of new technologies, new knowledge coming to light, there's new problems arising, and all the institutions might just fail to sort of answer these new problems. So there's always room for developing institutions, and the sort of the old forms or the old ways of realizing certain needs that we have might not just function in the future. And of course, even if we sort of see that there's the three forms of recognition that characterize the modern persons, nothing sort of stops us from thinking there might be new forms of self-understanding, new forms of recognition coming up in the future. So the recognition theoretical view is open for that sort of development in the future. Anyway, that's everything I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any questions or comments, or want to hear about something in more detail, please just either write me an email. My email address is somewhere over there on the slides, or write your questions and comments down below, as they tend to say in YouTube nowadays. But I kind of trust that the comments section over here is a little bit more polite than the YouTube section. Anyway, thanks, and see you at the conference. Hey.